Velkommen til Rig på Viden, en podcast om forskning i investering, finans og økonomi. Mit navn er Andrea Thormann.
Før vi går i gang, så skal det lige nævnes, at episoden her den er lavet i samarbejde med Enterprise Foundations, som forsker i europæiske fondsejede virksomheder. Du skal tage og gå ind på deres hjemmeside enterprisefoundations.dk, og så kan du læse om den forskning, de laver, og du kan tilmelde dig deres events. God fornøjelse.
This episode is about board governance in foundation-controlled firms versus traditional listed firms. My name is Benjamin Somofen, and I'm your host for this episode. To dive deeper into the topic, I have invited postdoc Kaya Caglar to the studio. Caglar does research for the Center for Corporate Governance at CBS. Caglar has a substantial academic background with working areas within corporate governance, corporate finance, banking, industrial organization, and lastly 5 years in audit and banking. Caglar, welcome to this episode of Rig på Viden.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. It was my pleasure to have this podcast with you.
First of all, I would like to do a little opener. Now, I just repeated all the things you do, but when friends from outside in the normal world ask you what you do, what is your usual answer?
My usual answer is that for a long time I have been focusing on the firms, like corporations, how do they work, how do they function, especially in after my PhD in Lund University in Sweden, I am focusing on the corporate finance, and now in the last two to 3 years, starting my work in the Center for Corporate Governance in CBS, I am focusing on corporate governance. So I should say that I am doing academic research about the firms, about their financing structures and as well as their ownership structures, and of course in the intersection of the corporate finance and corporate governance.
And when talking about firms, that's a really general topic and would be small, big, listed, non-listed. What kind of the universe are you focusing primarily on?
Yes, that's a good question. I should say that I have been focusing on the publicly listed firms, and the issue for that is that simply because of the lack of data, because it is more difficult to access the data of the unlisted firms, I should say. So now most of the time I am focusing on the publicly listed firms, but I have some research now ongoing on which is we are focusing on the Danish private firms too.
But you're also focusing on foundation-controlled firms.
Exactly. In the last 2 years, based on my project that I am working in CBS here, it's the Enterprise Foundation projects led by Sten Thompson. So I am focusing on the foundation control firms. Here we can simply call foundation-owned firms, but in this paper and another paper that I wrote, the sample is these are publicly listed firms, but the controlling owner is the foundations. So that's why instead of using foundation-owned firms might be misleading, because people might think that this is totally owned by the foundation. No, these are the foundation-controlled publicly listed firms.
Okay, so let's be a bit concrete here. So I suppose you're meaning you're, for example, looking at Novo Nordisk, which is a listed company,
exactly.
But they're still a foundation-owned firm by the Novo Nordisk Fund.
Exactly. For example, Novo Nordisk or Maersk or Carlsberg, these are good examples. These are publicly listed firms, and the major shareholder is the foundations. For example, in Novo Nordisk case, the Novo Nordisk Foundation. But there are also examples like private firms owned by foundation, like IKEA in Sweden, or MacLeod, which is the automobile supplier company in Germany. So these are also very giant firms, but they are not listed in the stock market. But Novo Nordisk, Maersk, they have individual shareholders like us, normal people can go and buy their shares.
And you just mentioned Sten Thompson, and Sten Thompson, he's also been in the podcast, and he has attended to some very great episodes about the topic. Why are you so interested in foundation-controlled firms whenever they are listed or not? What are their roles for the Danish society?
Okay, for my personal interest, honestly, starts before I met Sten Thompson, because I was working in HSBC Bank in Turkey, in Istanbul, and I was a credit risk supervisor, and one of my customer was MacLeod. This is a German, it's the automobile supplier company, which is very international company, by the way. Okay, its origin is German, but they are owned almost, I think 95% they are owned by the foundation, but they are not in the stock market. So, and when I was credit risk supervisor, I can see that the firm was, they provide full information to us as a banker, etc. So it took my attention, this specific ownership structure. When I start to work here with Stan, of course, I have a chance to develop my information about this ownership structure. It is very important in Denmark, not only in Denmark, also in Sweden. I mean, Nordic countries, but mostly in Denmark and Sweden. Especially in Denmark, all of your big corporations in the stock market, like Maersk, Carlsberg, Novo Nordisk, they are owned by the foundation. I mean, I should say they are controlled. The controlling owner are the foundation. But also, Sten Thompson has some work about the private foundation-owned firms too. So there are more firms in the privately owned by the foundation. But now, in my studies, I am focusing only on the publicly listed ones.
Okay. And how is the role in the Danish society? Can we say that foundation-controlled firms, they have a different behavior in general level compared to not foundation-controlled firms? Have you seen in general from other academic research?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I should admit that there are studies based on the Scandinavian data, but there aren't many studies based on the other countries' data. But I can confirm that there are foundation-owned or controlled firms in other countries like Japan, for example, or in some of other countries like Pakistan, India. For example, India, we have a Tata Group. So when it comes to your question for Denmark case, of course, Denmark is not a very big country, but in terms of economies of scale, the foundation control firms are really big for Danish economy. But for other countries, when we look, of course, for example, Japan, it's much bigger country, but still there is no research there. I mean, we found, for example, in this study, we are working on the international sample. So it's not only Danish companies or Swedish companies, international sample, but there is a chance to develop, increase the number of the firms, but just one has to go through the ownership structures of the firms. And when it comes to the ownership structures, it is not as easy to access the ownership structure information as the financial statements data of the firm. So it takes much more time. You should have access to special data.
What I heard from Sten at least is that foundation control firms, they are usually more long-term focused. Mm-hmm. And that's because they don't have, since they are controlling it, they don't have the necessary to focus on quarter by quarter and what do shareholders think. They can actually take some rather long-term decisions, may be hurtful in the short term. Is that also what you see on the international level?
Exactly. In this sample, I mean, also I had another paper that we had podcast together last year. We look at the creditors, the relation between the creditors and these foundation control firms. So in that paper also we can see that these foundation control firms are much more credit worthy. They are more credible in the eyes of the banks too. So why? Because these firms are really long-term oriented. Because in typical American ownership structure in capitalism, you should focus on the profit maximization of the shareholders. And you don't think of the other stakeholders. And what are the other stakeholders? Are the creditors, for example, debt holders or bondholders, employees, government, or in public in general. So when we look at the typical capitalist model, of course, they are the focus on the shareholders and profit maximization. But when it comes to the foundation-owned or foundation control firms, I mean, the foundation is the owner, but it is ownerless. Like there is no owner or a person or an institution which wants to which aim to profit maximization. Instead, the foundation, the founder, maybe they put a goal for the foundation, and most of the time these are philanthropic or charity oriented goals, like for example sustainability or helping the society or doing some research, which we can see in the Novo Nordisk case. So of course they have some kind of they have to be profitable to survive, but at the end point, I mean, their overall ultimate goal is not profit maximization. It is much more to live long. Okay, and then if you live long, of course, then you have a higher chance to consider the goals or consider the benefits of other stakeholders, including the employees, including the government or the country where they are headquartered or where they are operating, also the general in public. So at that point, especially in the era of this kind of era where we have lots of problems in the climate and nature, this ownership might be a solution to address these issues, especially in the publicly listed companies.
Yeah, I can see it. Let's dig a bit into that. You say that it can be an issue, but I suppose there are some practical issues by making these listed firms owned by foundations.
Of course, it is difficult because what is the beginning point? There should be a rich owner who is going to donate his ownership to a foundation. Am I right? But still, it is. There are some, for example, companies, not at the very big, giant, like public listed companies, but private companies whose owners are donating their in Germany or in United States. They are donating their ownership to the foundation. So there are some examples. But what I mean that, for example, in these publicly listed firms, in America, or for example, there are giant firms and there is like some kind of a controlling investors, like some hedge funds or venture capital. Compared to these kind of controlling owners, I think foundations owners are much more at least beneficial for the sake of whole society. When it comes to how we motivate the firms to adopt this kind of ownership structure, of course, this is a big dilemma. I mean, at some point, there should be someone who is sharing his wealth or her wealth with the general public. But there are some examples, like for example, there are some rich people who are donating their companies. I mean, I should say called donating, because at the end of the day, they are sacrificing from their personal wealth to set up this foundation. But this might attract some people, because at the end of the day, once you founded your foundation, I mean, everybody knows that who is the founder, and your name will live forever. Am I right? So there is some kind of a personal incentive at that point. If I was the owner, I prefer to, instead of like inherit my firm to my children or etc., I would prefer my firm to live forever. And in that sense, foundation might be an option. And then later, maybe these firms, if they really grow, and then they can be publicly listed in the stock markets, like Novo Nordisk or Carlsberg, without losing the control of the foundation in the firm.
Okay. Yes, I think we have. That was a good starter. We're also here because you have written some research. And first of all, can you very brief explain what are your main research questions?
In this paper? In this paper,
yeah.
Yes, in this paper, the main question is that we are looking what is the relationship between ownership structure, ownership, and the board governance of the firm. Mm-hmm. And of course, here we are focusing on the foundation ownership. As I told you, the paper is based on the data of the international firms. These are all publicly listed firms. We have, I should say, that 3 groups. The first group is foundation control listed firms, which is the foundation is the controlling owner. In the second group, we have the family controlled publicly listed firm, where the families are the controlling owner. And then the third group is the institutional investor, or shortly investor control public listed firms, which is the basic capital ownership model that we have seen in United States. And So, but in general, when we start the analysis, we just group into the two big group: foundation ownership and the others conventional ownership, which are the family-owned family-controlled firms, public listed firms, or investor. And we are comparing their board governance, board characteristics. The main idea, because the main idea here is that if you have if you have an owner whose agenda is different than the others, of course, this might have a reflection on the board, because board is the entity that control the firms on the behalf of the shareholders, and it connects the shareholders to the management of the firm.
Yeah. So you suppose if there is a great board governance, then it will also reflect in the rest of the company.
Exactly. Unfortunately, we don't. In general, in corporate finance, in corporate governance, we don't have some rich granular data at the lower management level. We don't have at the senior level or medium level. We don't have corporate governance data. So most of the time, we have only corporate governance data at the board levels. But the boards are important organ of the firms. Am I right? Because they are talking with the shareholders, they are talking with the management, and in fact, sometimes they are talking with the other stakeholders like employees or union, or they are also talking with creditors sometimes.
And just to give a concrete example so everybody here knows what board governance is, what could be an example of data you're looking at?
Mm-hmm. For example, what we are looking here, board of directors. For example, in board of directors, usually there might be like 5 to 9 members or 10 members, or some in big companies there might be more than 9. But in our sample, for example, the average mean value for the average number of board of directors was 9, which is in line with the international studies. So we are looking, for example, how many board members, board size, how many like female board directors, for example, in terms of gender question. And we are also talking about the age of the board directors, how long they are serving in the board, which we call it tenure. And also we are looking at in this paper whether there are some committees which are focusing on the sustainability issues or sustainable issues or ESG, environmental social governance issues. So because board of directors is a committee, but there are also subcommittees under this board of directors. So we are looking these kind of characteristics at the end of the point, because the board governance the governance of the board will reflect the lower level of the firm. And also the one more point, board of directors are critical organ or unit in the organization of the firm, because they are addressing the agency problem between shareholders and management, or shareholders and minority owners, or shareholders or management with the other stakeholders, like for example creditors.
And given these factors, how can we say about the board governance? Are there any of these examples which surprised you, or is everything very, very great?
From the perspective of the foundation control?
Yes.
For example, at the end of the day, in this foundation ownership model, I should say, we are expecting that they are long-term oriented based on the previous studies, and we are also expecting them they are not profit maximize oriented. Am I right? Therefore, we were expecting that this general idea should have some implication for the board governance. Yes, we find in many characteristics the board of directors of these firms are different from the board of directors of the family-controlled or investor-controlled public listed firm. For example, in foundation-controlled companies' boards, we have seen much more females, which is good in terms of, female representation is always good. And we are also seeing younger board members, and also the board members serve less period than compared to the than the family-owned, family-controlled, or investor-controlled. So we are seeing young generations or young people in the boards of these companies, and also we are seeing more females. And they are serving less period, which is also good, because if you serve too long time in the board, okay, maybe you bring some kind of experience, but at some point, for interest of the other stakeholders, serving on the board too long period is also not good from the corporate governance perspective. There is only one thing that surprised us. We were one of the things in general in corporate governance. There are like independent board of directors and dependent board of directors. Dependent board of directors are the ones from the company, and independent are totally from people from outside, which will bring more neutral opinion to the board of directors, also to protect the rights of other stakeholders. We were, of course, expecting to have more independent directors in foundation-controlled companies, boards, but the data show us that, in fact, there are less independent directors, but there is one explanation for that why. The reason is that, of course, the board of the foundations, because there are foundations, and the companies that they invest, we call them foundation control companies. Of course, they want to control the companies that they invest. So therefore, they are assigning more dependent directors to control their companies. Maybe the reason might be, of course, this area needs much more research, but the reasoning might be the foundation wants to control the board of directors in the company, so this board can serve for goals other than profit maximization.
Yeah, and usually I also think if you have, let's just stick to Novo Nordisk or a general firm, there aren't usually other shareholders who are holding more than 50% of the shares as a single institutional investors. Mm-hmm. So there is also a huge overlap in the ownership from the foundation owners.
You mean, no, the thing is that, for example, the reason why I was studying publicly listed companies is that at the end of the day, these are very big companies, am I right? They are big resources or big source for the economies, not only for Denmark, for overall. And here the thing is that these companies, for example, they have like maybe 30-40% ownership, or in some of cases 50%, but the rest is the public, maybe other companies or other investors or individual shareholders like us, okay? So, for example, but what is the alternative in the United States and in other countries? The alternative might be the venture capital firms or hedge funds. But in the foundation case, for example, when I buy the share of Novo Nordisk or Myers, I know that at the end of the day, there's a controlling owner, and the ultimate goal of this controlling owner, not only profit maximization, but to do something good for the society. Am I right? And also from the agency problem perspective, I know that this controlling owner, because I am a minority owner, will not jeopardize my rights, because this company will continue. Their aim is long-termism. They are long-term oriented, because in other case, in the capitalist case, the controlling owner might be short-term oriented, might sell the company or might do some kind of investment, very short-term oriented, and it might be on the long run, it might be harmful for the minority owners. Who are the minority? The other individual shareholders in the stock market. So at that point, I believe that foundation ownership is good, because, for example, as an investor, we need to do that research, but it is another research idea to analyze, look at the stock market performance of these firms. So as an individual shareholder, I think I feel more relaxed when I buy Novo Nordisk shares compared to another firm controlled by the institutional investors. Like institutional investor, it can be like any firm like venture capital or private equity firms, or this like big trade, I don't want to name them now, but big traditional investment companies, they might be much more short-term oriented, and they want to get like profit in the short run, and then they might go out of the firm. But then as a minority owner, it might harm me.
That makes sense. So we are soon running out of time, but I still have two very short questions for you. And the first is, do you have an exact number or indication how much is the different independent board members from foundation or control firms and your control group?
Okay, let me say the exact number to you. For example, when we compare foundation control firms to the non-foundation control firms, which are family-owned, we find that, for example, 58% of chance, the mean value for the independent directors is 58%, which is lower than the 61% in the non-foundation control firm. So we have a higher chance to see there are more independent directors in the family control companies or investor control companies. But as I thought, I explained the reasoning because, I mean, at the end we were expecting, because we think that, okay, foundation model is a little much more better, thinking other stakeholders, therefore they might employ more independent directors. But at some point, the foundation as an entity at the top, they want to control the firms so the firms can function not only towards the profit maximization, but other goal of the foundation, which is more sustainability or thinking about environment or other charity purposes.
Sometimes writing a research paper, it feels like going into a vacation, because when I'm going to a new country, I always go back home and want to visit 3 new other places. And that's the same with research. It always opens up for new research ideas. Mm-hmm. So this paper, which new research question does it open for your colleagues around it?
Of course. I mean, for example, now this is my second paper about this foundation control firms, and the first one was about the creditor governance that I told you, and even it's already been published in a finance journal. So always you develop ideas. For example, after these 2 papers, for example, I develop an idea. It might be nice for future research. It might be nice to look at the performance of these foundation control firms in the stock market. And as I told you, because these guys, these foundations, not only ruling their own wealth, they are also ruling the wealth of the minority owners. Okay, and these are really giant firms. And one of our goals is also to increase this. Now we have, for example, 411 firms, and 111 of them are foundation control firms. But we want to increase the number of these firms, not only in Scandinavia, like focusing on other regions of the world too. So we want to see that, because, for example, we want to understand their performance, because, for example, now Novo Nordisk is one of the most valuable firms in the world. So this is, at that point, we need to prove that this is a good ownership structure, am I right? And I believe that this is a good ownership structure, alternative to the capitalist system.
Yes. Kaya Caglar, thank you very much for attending this episode of Fri på Viden.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to reach out to the society through you.
My name is Benjamin Sommersen.
Tak for, at du lyttede med til Rig på Viden. Jeg håber, at du lærte noget. Og hvis du nu synes godt af vores podcast, så kan du støtte os ved at følge den på Spotify eller skrive en anbefaling på iTunes. Inde på LinkedIn, der kan du følge André Thormand, Benjamin Sommersen eller Henrik Foged Rasmussen. På genhør.